Welcome to Clued in Mystery. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Sarah. I have been so excited this week knowing that today we're going to interview Colleen Cambridge.
I know I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
So I'll introduce her. Colleen Gleason, aka Colleen Cambridge, C.M. Gleason, and Alex Mandan, is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling and award-winning author who can't seem to decide what type of book to write, so she writes a lot of different genres. So far, Colleen has written everything from vampire hunters to dystopian romance to steampunk, historical romance, and mysteries with a supernatural flair or a historical setting. One element, however, that appears in all of her stories is that of partnership, whether it be professional, romantic, or both. Colleen lives in the Midwest US with her family and two dogs and is always working on her next book. Welcome, Colleen. We are so excited to have you on Clued in Mystery.
Thank you so much. I love a podcast that is devoted to mystery, which is my absolute favorite genre. I grew up reading Nancy Drew, Trixie Belden, The Three Investigators, you name it, and Agatha Christie.
Wonderful. Well, let's dive in and let's talk a little bit about your series, An American in Paris series, and the Phyllida Bright. Is that how you say the name?
Phyllida Bright. Yep.
And your Phyllida Bright series. So both of these feature real historical people and also some fictional characters. And on past episodes, we've discussed how mysteries featuring real people can quickly veer into outlandish or campy territory. And yours don't do that. So how do you avoid that with your books?
Well, first of all, thank you. I take that as a compliment. I appreciate that. Just to clarify, the An American in Paris mysteries take place in post-war Paris, and my main character, my amateur detective, is fictional, but she is the best friend of Julia Child, who is at the time learning how to cook in Paris. And my Phyllida Bright mysteries, Phyllida Bright is the amateur detective, and she is the housekeeper for Agatha Christie. And Agatha Christie, of course, makes appearances in the books. Also, I wrote 3 books in the Lincoln's White House mystery series with an amateur detective named Adam Quinn, and he is mentored by Abraham Lincoln. So I have 3 series where I'm doing what I kind of consider a famous person to be like an anchor to the series, to the world, to the setting. Everybody or most people probably have an idea of who Julia Child is, although recently a young man said to me, was she an artist? He had no idea who Julia Child was. Anyway, so most people have an idea of who Julia Child is, Agatha Christie, and of course everybody knows Abraham Lincoln. So these people, these real people, are the anchor, but they're not the spotlight. They're not the main character in the series. So what I try to do in order to keep things real, if you will, is I try to keep them in their lane. So basically, if you see Lincoln in my Lincoln books, if you see Christie in my Phyllida Bright books, or Julia Child in the An American in Paris mysteries, they're in their own lanes. Julia's in the kitchen cooking or shopping for food or talking about food. Lincoln is being a president during a war in Washington, D.C. And Christie is really just wants to be left alone to write her novels. And she really does not like that all these dead bodies keep showing up and disrupting her. But she gets a lot of ideas for books from all these dead bodies showing up. So I don't mean to suggest that Julia's in the kitchen cooking and that's all that's happening, but she and Tabitha Knight, who's my main character, are friends. Most of their interactions take place in the world of Julia's lane, if you will, Lane, lane, cooking, talking about food. She might be in the kitchen cooking while she and Tabitha are talking about the mystery and going over clues or theories or whatever. Lincoln is being very presidential and saying things that he would have said or did say or is documented as saying relative to the war, but he's also maybe talking to Adam Quinn about, what's happening with these dead bodies. And Christie, like I said, she was kind of a shy person and didn't really want publicity, so it seemed realistic for her character to not be in the forefront, trying to figure out who left a dead body in her library. one night. By the way, the body in the library, Agatha Christie, Okay, so it really fits her character. So trying to keep them in their lane and keep them in their character is how I try and manage those characters, those real people as characters. Interestingly, though, I do have people who would love to see more of Julia, more of Agatha, but I resist that a little because of that fear of mine of going out of their realm too much. You know what I mean? And a side note to that, for that same reason, I can't ever imagine wanting to or being successful at writing a series or a book where the main character is or was a real person. To me, that is way too restrictive. I would just feel like I had too many guardrails. I'd feel like I was trying to bowl, and I don't bowl very well, so my ball would always want to go in the gutter. So this isn't going to work for me. It was suggested originally that Lincoln be the detective in this mystery series and that Julia be the detective in the mystery series. And I kind of not fought. I want to say I fought back on it. I want to say that I really negotiated for it not to be that way for those reasons.
So you made that distinct decision to keep Julia Child, Agatha Christie, Abraham Lincoln as sidekicks rather than sleuths. And what else contributed to that?
Well, in particular, Agatha Christie was the one I wanted to mention that because you would think, not you, but the reader might think, well, gosh, if you're writing a mystery series, Agatha Christie should be the amateur detective. She's a mystery writer. And other than the fact that her personal character is such that she would rather just be writing and certainly did not really want to, she had a fear of publicity because of when she disappeared, and that became a big deal and people only ever wanted to talk about that. But aside from that, as a mystery writer, I can appreciate the fact that she didn't want to be solving mysteries, because as a writer, I'd much rather create the suspects, develop the clues, come up with the motives. It's easier to be in control than to try and follow paths, which is why I'm a writer and not a detective. So that was the reason I really had to struggle myself for a little bit with myself when I first started that series. Why would Agatha not want to be the detective? Why would she not, push herself forward? And those were the reasons that I came up with, and they made most sense to me. That's not her wheelhouse.
How did you select specifically that Julia Child was going to be that anchor, or that Agatha Christie or Abraham Lincoln were going to be those anchors for your mysteries?
Well, the truth is, it was not my idea. None of them were my ideas. I have written a number of books, as you mentioned, and one of my most well-known series is the Stoker and Holmes series, which is Sherlock Holmes's niece and Bram Stoker's sister. So that's where I was starting to touch base, was starting to touch into this whole idea of real people with fictional people. So I think that was in the mind of the editor that I was working with, and she liked my ability, I think, to write historical set. And I think she also liked the mysteries that I was working. I was doing some other mysteries, and she said, "Hey, what would you think about doing something like this?" So honestly, I have to give my editor credit for the basic concepts of, "Hey, do you want to do something with Agatha Christie's housekeeper?" I mean, that's what she said, and left everything else up to me to sort of develop. Same with the Julia Child situation. So I can't take credit for the idea, but I will take credit for the development of the stories.
No, that's great. I think that, a good editor or even, writing partner or something that can see those strengths that we have
Mm.
and, help develop those ideas. I mean, that's just invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
So, how much creative license do you feel like you have when you write about these real historical figures, Colleen?
I actually try to not take any creative license, in the sense that, I mean, obviously, any interaction they have with my fictional characters has to be, fictional, has to be made up. But I really try and be extremely strict with how these characters are portrayed. I really try and not push the envelope with any of them. Like, it would be very unusual, I think, for example, Agatha Christie to be, walking around interviewing people. I just don't think that would be in her character. She was a shy person and just wanted to be left alone, mostly to write. So I'm pretty strict about that. I try really, really hard to keep them from not doing anything that really would be evident to me from my research that they had done. For example, when I first started working on the American in Paris mysteries, the first thing I did was start reading Julia's autobiography, My Life in France, which put not only her voice in my head, but also the things that she noticed and did in specific things. And I lift specific things from that book all the time. For example, in the first book in the series, the very first line of the book is Julia Child had a mayonnaise problem. That's like a one line thing in her autobiography. And I took that and blew that into like a subplot throughout the book. So, I just tried to take something, it could be a throwaway line like that, and take something that I know made sense and just develop it. And then I don't go anywhere else with it. Like, you know what I mean? For example, also in the third book that's coming out in April, A Fashionably French Murder, which is basically in the world of haute couture, which makes sense, 1950. I have Julia and Tabitha and another person go to an actual, modeling show at a fictional haute couture couture, and I know for a fact that Julia went to one. I would never have thought of her going to, an haute couture. And pardon my French pronunciation, I can hear it in my head, but it doesn't always come out right. So, I could see, I wasn't sure. Like I'm thinking, Julia really wasn't, known for her fashion. She was a very statuesque woman who was very different than the French. She couldn't find shoes there because her feet were so big. It was very hard for her to find shoes. So I thought to myself, do I really want her to go to this fashion show? But I actually read in her autobiography that she did go to one fashion show. So I felt, okay, I can justify this. So if I can't justify it somehow with something in the research, I'm not going to have them do it for the most part. Obviously, the investigating of the murders, obviously Julia Child didn't find dead bodies all the time like she does with Tabitha in the book. Neither does Agatha have bodies showing up in her household all the time. But their reactions and I try to put them in positions where if it's going to happen, it made sense for it to happen. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it, but I'm really strict about it. I don't want to have anybody go, oh, Julia would never do that. Or, oh my gosh, Agatha Christie would never. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned research. And with Julia Child, for instance, that would be pretty easy. We have lots of television appearances, her own television show. Like you said, she's written books, her cookbooks. You really can get a feel for her voice that way. And Agatha Christie, not so many interviews, not very many appearances on television, and then even more difficult with some of the other people that you reference. How did you, because for Agatha in particular, I really feel like, yes, this is what Agatha would sound like. This is what she would say in this situation. Like, she feels very real to me. So how did you research that and get a feel for it when we know she was someone who kept to herself?
That's a great question. Agatha in particular, the research that I did and continue to do for that series is wonderful because a lot of it entails rereading Agatha's books. I can consider that research if I'm taking an afternoon to read, and then there were none, or Death on the Nile or something. And the research elements are really threefold when I'm reading those books. First, I get my head into the world of British, the way they speak, the way they talk, that kind of a thing. So I have that in my head. And then it gives me an insight into her as a writer because of certain elements that are always in her books. She's a romantic. Agatha Christie was quite a romantic. In most of her books or stories, there was this, this either a romantic couple or, star-crossed lovers or something where it's could be very subtle or very small part of the story, but there's often this element of a partnership, of a man and woman partnership. There are a few gay characters in her books, very subtly gay. There's some question about, but generally male and female relationships. But the whole idea that she, had these certain core things and justice and, those kinds of things. So, and how her mind worked with the plot. So those two things. And then also the actual time period itself. The 1930s is when the Phyllida Bright books are set. They'll be perpetually in the 1930s, early to mid. I'm not going to get too close to World War II because that gets ugly. And I like to stay not ugly other than dead bodies. So she's funny. I mean, Christie's funny too. So I can take all those little elements that I get from reading her books and also even what I know about her life from her biography, and use those pieces to create the Christie character as I imagine her, um, as being a writer myself who would rather just be left alone to write most of the time, whose mind is always trying to figure out how to kill somebody. Like literally, I don't know how my husband goes to sleep at night because I spend my days trying to figure out how to kill people and hide it, you know? So with that in my mind, that's probably the best way to describe how I've developed Christie herself. Now, I do want to say though that it's a both good and bad thing that I have access to so many things about Julia Child, because that means if I'm wrong or inaccurate, the error can be very glaring for many. Like, you know, you can go look at the French Chef TV show online if you want to see it. And if I'm not embodying Julia Child, it's very obvious. People can check on me, basically. It's easy for people to check on me. And with Lincoln, the same kind of thing. Everybody knows stuff about Lincoln. And there are lots of people who know a lot of things about Lincoln. So in writing those books, I was always that was probably the most nerve wracking of all of them, was just like, oh my gosh, am I going to get something wrong about Abraham Lincoln? Because there are so many people who are so knowledgeable about him and the Civil War and all that. So tenterhooks, a little bit of tenterhooks.
What has surprised you, Colleen, about writing mysteries that feature real and fictional people?
To be honest, how they actually can kind of fit in, like how they actually can fit in and still stay in their lane, so to speak. I don't have any other way to say it. You know, for some reason, it made sense that somebody died at Lincoln's first inaugural ball. For some reason, it made sense that somebody was found dead in Julia Child's apartment building with her chef's knife next to it, bloody chef's knife, you know, that kind of thing. So I don't, and a body in Agatha Christie's own library, you know, I don't know. They just feels like they fit, which is kind of wild, but that's what makes it incredibly fun.
Well, and I love that you take those pieces of known history and weave them into the stories. Like you know, you referred to the mayonnaise, or we know that she wrote a book, The Body in the Library. So, you know, yeah, maybe she did get that inspiration when there was a body in her library.
Exactly. I mean, that is the where I have the most fun with these books. Honestly, it's, and the second book in the American in Paris mysteries, isn't the historical element to that is also something that Julia Child wasn't connected to, but the way the French people protected or tried to protect their wine during the occupation. So much fascinating information about what they did to try and protect, you know, basically their national entity. This sense that wine is so incredibly important to the French people. It's not just a beverage; it is their national, you know, part of their national psyche. And all the interesting things that I learned about it, and to be able to weave a story around that, even if it's well after the occupation, 5 years after the occupation, take those elements. That is one of the most fun things about writing historical set mysteries and with real people involved. It's just you know, in the bio you said I can't decide what to write, or because that's why I write so many different things. I actually should change that in my bio, because I feel like the sweet spot for me I have found, and that is historical set mysteries, for all of the reasons we've been talking about.
Can you ever imagine a crossover where Julia Child and Agatha Christie meet and combine forces, maybe with their sidekick sleuths along for the ride?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I have thought about, it would probably be, you know, Phyllida Bright and Tabitha Knight, which, by the way, I didn't intend to make them rhyme. I realized well after the fact. Tabitha Knight, Phyllida Bright. Okay, so I actually have thought about that because Agatha Christie traveled a lot, and I could see her bringing Phyllida and the household to Paris, you know, after the war. I mean, they'd be much older, which would be super fun for readers of the Phyllida Bright series to read something set in the 1950s, 20 years later, and see, oh, what has happened that we don't know is going to happen in the series. So yes, I actually have toyed with that idea. At some point down the line, I might do that. But I could see that happening. Not necessarily, like I said, Julia and Agatha teaming up, but the two worlds colliding somehow.
That would be a lot of fun.
I love that.
Yeah, it really would be.
I really love that you set the Agatha stories with Max in them, because you talked about Agatha being a romantic, and I just think the Max and Agatha story is so sweet and wonderful after everything we know that happened in her earlier life. Was that a conscious choice of what time period of Agatha's life you chose to write in?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. It was very deliberate. So when the idea was posed to me, Agatha Christie's housekeeper, that was all the suggestion was really a vague, hey, what about this? Would you ever do this? So I had to take a look at Agatha's life. I really didn't know anything really about her life at that point. I'd read most of her books when I was younger and through as I got older, but I didn't know enough about her life. So yeah, it took me not long, maybe a couple hours of research to be like, oh yeah, early to mid 30s was like her, her prime, if you will, and not her prime in her writing so much, but it was really when she was
Mhm.
coming into her own. She was, remarried to Max. It was after the Archie Christie debacle, and she was, writing the books that were sort of starting to break out, Murder of Roger Ackroyd and some of these, the ABC Murders, some of these other ones. So it was the right time. It was the right time period. And their relationship was fine, but there were issues later on. But at the time period I have them in, everybody's very happy. And he really did. I mean, he insisted that she marry him. She didn't want to. She's like, I'm 13 years older than you. Oh, we can't do this. And he convinced her to marry him, which I think is wonderful. And that he appreciated her for who she was, her personality. They were on a trip, if I remember correctly, and he was taking her back because her daughter was ill and he was helping her get back to England. And they had some rough patches where, I don't know, something broke down or something. But the way she handled herself really impressed him. And so then later he came and visited her in England and was going to go home. And the night before he went to go home, as the story goes, he went into her bedroom and sat on her bed and said, let's get married. And she's like, no. And he's like, let's get married. So when they got married, she actually put her age, it was at least a year younger than she really was on her marriage certificate, because she felt super self-conscious about it. And they traveled a lot together. But later on, like closer to the end of their marriage, I think that, you know, things weren't quite as hunky dory. I was really sad when I read that too. I was like, damn it, I'm just gonna ignore this.
Yeah.
So I am
Yeah.
ignoring it because right at this time, and when I'm studying the books, they're fun and they're good together.
So, Colleen, where can readers find you?
My website is ColleenCambridge.com, and it actually has all of my books that I've written as both Cambridge and Gleason, so everything's all in one place. I'm also on most social media places now. I mean, social media is sort of in flux right now, but you can find me on Facebook under Colleen Cambridge or Colleen Gleason, either one. And I am on Instagram as Colleen Gleason. So, if all else fails, look for Gleason. Cambridge usually follows because I was Gleason long before I was Cambridge. Let's put it that way. So, yeah, so website, Instagram, Facebook. And my newsletter is a good thing to sign up for because with social media being awkward and in flux, you'll get all the information about my events because I always do many events around each book release. I have a book coming out in April, at the end of April 2025, and a book coming out at the end of October 2025. And so those, I'll be doing lots of events. I do travel, so maybe I'll be coming to your locality. Who knows?
Wonderful. Well, I'll make sure that I'm signed up, and I hope that our listeners do as well.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun, really interesting questions. I do a lot of interviews, and these were sort of a different approach, and I really appreciated the thoughtful questions that made me really think about, how do I do that? Why do I do it? So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was just a pleasure. And thank you for joining us today on Clued in Mystery. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery.
Clued in Mystery is written and produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Stephen. Music is by Shane Ivers. If you liked what you heard, please consider telling a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing with your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our website at cluedinmystery.com to sign up for our newsletter, The Clued In Chronicle, or to join our paid membership, The Clued In Cartel. We're on social media at Clued In Mystery.